In this video, I'll talk about selecting and implementing instructional strategies. Let's suppose that you are a second grade teacher and today you will be teaching about gravity. What would you do? Would you start the lesson by telling them that gravity is the force that attracts a body toward any other physical body having mass? Or would you rather start by telling them the story of Isaac Newton and the apple? Or perhaps you might start by having them experimenting dropping objects like balls or coins. Deciding what you consider to be the most effective approach will be part of your instructional strategy. Generally speaking, the two main goals of an instructional strategy are identifying the most appropriate way to deliver the instruction and identifying the most effective way to facilitate learning. These goals must be in alignment with the learning objectives and the target audience. For instance, the most sophisticated online training will be useless if your target audience do not have access to the internet. When selecting the instructional delivery method, it is important to review several instructional theories and explore which ones you can implement. For example, extensive studies done in the area of cooperative learning have found that knowledge acquisition is promoted significantly by having students working collaboratively. So you would need to examine whether your target audience and the learning context of your instruction are conducive to implementing this kind of a strategy. These are just a few of many instructional theories that might help you framing the organization of your overall instructional strategy. For instance, you could decide using Merrill's first principles of instruction, and you would present the content as an authentic problem, and you would include activation of prior knowledge, demonstration, application, and integration. Or you could decide using scenario-based learning, in which the student is assigned a role in a hypothetical case and is asked to make decisions about the questions or the challenges presented. So it is important to become familiar with several instructional theories to increase the probability of implementing an effective strategy based on the context and the target audience. Once you select the overall instructional framework, you could then examine different instructional techniques to facilitate the achievement of each learning objective. Recall that our goal as instructional designers is to make content easy to understand, but at the same time to make it easy to remember. To facilitate the achievement of the learning objectives, it is very helpful to make sure that each of them is specific and that is measurable. Generally speaking, you should use action verbs and avoid using verbs like know or understand as part of your learning objective. For instance, let's take a look at the following learning objectives. The learner must know about the Civil War and understand the importance of the Civil War as part of the American history. So the first one is too broad and is not measurable. What does the learner need to know about the Civil War? Everything? The second one is not measurable because you cannot assess whether someone understands something just by looking at him or her. So let's try to revise these objectives. The first objective is now more specific, and both of them are now measurable. These types of learning objectives are also called behavioral objectives because they start with a behavior. Once the objectives are specific and measurable, you can then associate them with the kind of learning expected, also known as the learning outcomes. For instance, let's suppose that one of the objectives is that the learner must identify the year the Civil War began. The associated learning outcome is verbal information, because the learner is asked to provide a specific response. To address this objective, the instruction could simply have a slide with the corresponding content. By the way, do you recall the year it began? Yes, it was in 1861. So we could have a narrated presentation with a slide like this one. However, as instructional designers, we wouldn't be making any effort of making it easier for the learner to remember this date. By examining a list of instructional theories, we observe that schema theory posits that learning is facilitated when we associate new information with pre-existing knowledge. So if all students already know the year of the American Independence Day, our first attempt might be trying to link these two dates. So do you think that it will be easier for students to remember the year the Civil War started by telling them that it occurred 85 years after the Independence Day? What do you think? Probably not. Not only they need to remember the number 85, but they need to also add it to 1776. As a second attempt, we might try avoiding mentioning specific numbers and have something like this. This probably doesn't make it any easier to remember it. And not only that, the main problem is that they are not memorizing the exact year, just an approximation. So let's keep looking for instructional strategies related to verbal information that might be a little bit more effective. And we have the association techniques like mnemonics, analogies, acronyms, etc. So we could try using a rhyme as a mnemonic technique. Johnny Reb with stick and gun went to war in 61. I am sure that some of you might think of other techniques that might be more effective than this one. You need to evaluate the effectiveness of each technique by conducting a formative evaluation. As you become more familiar with instructional strategies, it will be faster and easier for you to identify the most effective ones. It is important to keep in mind that the instructional strategies must be aligned with the target audience and the context in which you will be delivering the instruction. For instance, a compulsory training program might require more motivational strategies than a training program in which learners have a significant intrinsic motivation. Finally, recall that when you are looking for an instructional strategy, you need to ask yourself, what is the best way for my target audience to learn, apply, and remember the content?